Здесь много машин, кто с продуктами, с фруктами, овощами, с цветами.
The real power that keeps a country alive is the logistics flowing through its veins. When that flow stops, even the greatest empires suffocate. This is exactly what is happening in Russia right now. From Krasnodar in the west to Lake Baikal in the east, from Yakutia in the north to the Georgian border in the south, everything is locked down. The railways have been crippled by sabotage and neglect. This crisis in the transport sector is hitting the Russian people directly. Market shelves are emptying. Vital medicines are running out in pharmacies. People are waiting in lines stretching for miles on the highways, hungry, thirsty, and freezing in temperatures of -20 degrees. Today on MrWARLOG, we will witness Russia's logistical apocalypse. To understand the scale of the crisis, let's lay out the map. Because this is not just a regional disruption, but a blockage cutting across the continent. The most terrifying face of the disaster is unfolding near Lake Baikal, the heart of Russia. The reports coming in are terrifying. Exactly 10,000 vehicles have been stuck for 3 full days in a 100-kilometer-long queue at -20 degrees Celsius. The drivers have run out of food, and their water has frozen. Nearby cafes and gas stations have exhausted their supplies. People are huddling together in their vehicles to keep from freezing. However, the crisis is not limited to Baikal. The Volga region, the heart of Russian industry, is also paralyzed. Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, Ulyanovsk, and Saratov. The strategically important M5 Ural, M7 Volga, and M12 Vostok federal highways are completely blocked. Authorities in Tatarstan have helplessly activated the Type A emergency plan. The Ministry of Emergency Situations is trying to set up mobile heating tents, but more than 40 heavy vehicles are already buried under the snow. A video shared by a female driver stranded on the Moscow-Kazan highway sums up the collapse of infrastructure. There is only one gas station every 150 kilometers. There is a 2-kilometer line there. There are no toilets, no food, just cold and waiting. This gridlock immediately hit city shelves. In Yakutsk, Siberia's coldest city, bread was unavailable in stores on January 3rd. The bakeries are working, and there is flour. But because the trucks that would take that flour to the bakeries and the bread to the stores are stuck on the road, people were left without bread for New Year's. From Yakutia to Kamchatka, schools were closed and workdays were shortened. The situation is no different in the Krasnodar region. Gas stations ran out of fuel. Electricity cables are broken and lying on the roads. As Russia's internal arteries clogged, its only lifeline to the outside world was also cut off. Since there is no direct land border between Russia and Armenia, the vital Upper Lars border crossing, which passes through Georgia, descended into complete chaos. By mid-December 2025, queues on the Russian side reached 2,500 trucks. Thousands of trucks carrying goods to Armenia were unable to move for days, despite the electronic queue system. The situation worsened around New Year's. Due to heavy snowfall on December 26th to 29th, truck crossings were completely banned, leaving 1,200 trucks stranded in the mountains. The situation remained unchanged even in the first days of January 2026. Armenians trying to return home for New Year's and trucks carrying goods faced the danger of freezing in queues of 400 vehicles. This congestion caused prices in Armenia to skyrocket, and goods rotted at customs. Russia dragged not only its own citizens, but also its trading partners into a logistical quagmire. Just the highways? Russia's lifeline, the railways, was also shaken by a major accident. In the Amur region, a massive 35-car freight train derailed on the Trans-Baikal Railway. Although the official statement refers to an accident, there are very strong allegations that this train was not carrying ordinary cargo. According to the British press, this line is the main route carrying artillery shells sent by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to Putin. The fact that the train derailed at this very strategic point raises the question: sabotage? This accident and the snowfall also paralyzed civilian transportation. Passenger trains were stranded under the snow in Krasnodar. Passengers on the Novorossiysk-Vladikavkaz train waited for more than 10 hours without electricity, heating, or food. The toilets were locked. People got off the train to avoid freezing and tried to reach the highway by walking through the snow. The state officially abandoned them to their fate. So, What happens if trucks get stuck on the road and trains derail? When the logistics chain breaks, the crisis doesn't just stay in the news bulletins. That crisis directly enters the citizen's kitchen, their child's lunchbox, and their elderly relative's medicine cabinet. What is happening in Russia right now is, in every sense, an access crisis. A letter from Yakutsk, one of the coldest inhabited places on Earth, starkly reveals the severity of the situation. On January 3rd, in the middle of the holidays, a citizen writes to the local press, "I went to the market to buy bread. The shelves were empty. The grocery stores are open, but there is no bread. Where are the distributors? What kind of holiday is this?" The problem is not just bread. Due to this paralysis in the logistics network, shipments of eggs, chicken, and fresh vegetables have stopped.
Здесь много машин, кто с продуктами, с фруктами, овощами, с цветами.
Tons of food, frozen in truck trailers, are going to waste. In cities outside Moscow and St. Petersburg, people have reverted to that scarcity mentality reminiscent of the Soviet era. Panic buying has begun, hoarding has resurfaced. Even if products are available, their prices are sky high. The projections for Moscow in 2026 are dire. Due to the government's new environmental tax and rising logistics costs, the price of packaged goods has skyrocketed. A simple bottle of water, juice, or yogurt, it is becoming a luxury item simply because the plastic and transportation are expensive. Experts warn, by 2026, accessing sugar, oil, and beef will mean spending a fortune for the average Russian family. But there is something more dangerous than hunger: the lack of medicine. The logistics crisis has pulled the plug on Russia's healthcare system. Thousands of vital medicines are being withdrawn from pharmacies. These drugs, which must be transported in a cold chain, are spoiling because temperature control cannot be maintained in trucks stuck on the roads. Domestic drug manufacturers cannot obtain the active ingredients that should come from India and China, because those ingredients are also stuck at the border or in the snow. The government says, if there are no Western drugs, use domestic ones. But domestic production cannot fill the gap. Serum stocks are running out in hospitals and surgeries are being postponed. For a diabetic or heart patient, the phrase, "the truck is stuck on the road," is not a simple delay. It is a death sentence. Logistics isn't just about food and medicine. It's also about spare parts. Russia's infrastructure is aging and breaking down. Normally, when a boiler room malfunctioned, the part would arrive within 24 hours. Now that part has been stuck in a truck stuck in the snow in Tatarstan for 5 days. The result? Tens of thousands of people in Krasnodar and Podolsk are sitting in their homes without electricity or heating in sub-zero temperatures. When logistics stop, repairs stop, and people freeze to death in their own homes. In a country where civilians cannot find bread or medicine, do you think the situation is any different for soldiers at the front? No. The logistics crisis has cut off the lifeline of the Russian army. What Putin calls the war machine is actually a massive logistics operation. For a soldier to fight, he needs food, fuel, and most importantly, ammunition every day. However, this gridlock on Russia's internal lines is directly reflected on the front lines as an ammunition shortage. That 35-car train that derailed in the Amur region was not just a pile of metal. According to intelligence reports, that train was carrying North Korean-made 152mm artillery shells, the lifeblood of Russian artillery. The derailment of that train meant that Russian artillery batteries on the Donetsk or Zaporizhia front would be silent for days. As the Ukrainian army advances, Russian soldiers shout, "Send ammunition!" over the radio, but there is no response. Because that ammunition is lying in derailed wagons 6,000 kilometers away, buried in the snow. The frozen diesel crisis, which has immobilized civilian trucks in Yakutia, does not spare military vehicles. The Russian army's logistics are also dependent on the same refineries and the same roads. When quality fuel and antifreeze cannot reach the front lines, tank engines freeze. Armored personnel carriers are not working. Soldiers are left defenseless in a metal box that doesn't work at -15 degrees. When logistics stop, the Russian army's maneuverability drops to zero. If there are no medicines in civilian pharmacies, there are none in field hospitals either. Antibiotics, painkillers, tourniquets, all of these have to come from those blocked roads. Because the logistics chain is broken, a Russian soldier with a simple shrapnel wound gets infected and dies. Because the antibiotics are waiting in the back of a truck stuck in the mud in Tatarstan. The prevailing psychology among soldiers is, if you get wounded, there are no supplies to save you, you're left to your fate. The biggest impact is psychological. When a soldier at the front calls his family at home, he hears, there's no bread, no electricity. He waits for ammunition, but it doesn't come. Food and water are delayed. This situation creates an abandonment syndrome in the army. So why did a whole country end up like this because of a snowfall? Winter is not a surprise season for Russia, is it? The answer is very clear. It's not just the snow. It's a system failure. Russian logistics came to a halt not because of a single reason, but because of 4 interconnected fatal blows. The first blow is the personnel crisis and wave of bankruptcies. Trucks are the heart of logistics, but there are no people left to drive them. Russia's transport sector is experiencing its deepest crisis in the last 10 years. According to Wood Central reports, approximately 7,000 transport companies are currently on the verge of bankruptcy or being liquidated due to rising costs and a shortage of drivers. Why? Because most Russian drivers have either been drafted to the front lines or have fled the country to avoid conscription. The gap in the sector is so large that even if wages increase, there are no workers to be found. Transportation costs have risen by 50%, and this increase is forcing everyone from lumber mills to food producers to close their doors. The second blow is the expulsion of immigrant drivers. What do you think Russia did when it had no drivers of its own? It expelled the foreign drivers who kept logistics afloat. Moscow's new immigration laws, introduced on security grounds, have crippled the sector. In particular, hundreds of Armenian truck drivers have been deported or blacklisted due to Russia's 90-day stay limit. Drivers protesting in Yerevan are rebelling, saying, "We transport Russia's goods, but they won't let us into the country." Russia has cut off the lifeline that brings bread to its own market for the sake of nationalist policies. The third blow, the fuel crisis. In one of the world's largest energy giants, vehicles are stranded on the road due to fuel shortages. It's unbelievable, but true. A frozen diesel scandal is unfolding in Yakutia and Siberia. Low-quality fuel sold at stations gels and freezes in storage at sub-zero temperatures, immobilizing vehicles. Due to the war economy, quality control at refineries has declined, and quality additives are unavailable. The result? Thousands of trucks with engines that stall at -30 degrees and won't start again. The final blow is the railway suicide. Could the railway have been the savior as the highway collapsed? No, it couldn't. Because Russian Railways cut its 2026 investment budget by 1/5. The money is not going to track maintenance or new locomotives. It is going to missiles and ammunition shipments. According to Ukrainian intelligence reports, vital projects going to Baltic ports have been halted. The rails are aging, the signaling systems are collapsing. Administrative failure has also crippled the railway network. The overarching factor in all this is the collapse of the economic model. Experts note that as Russia enters 2026, it is not just facing a temporary crisis, but has entered a period of structural stagnation. The war economy has reached its limits. The central bank has raised interest rates to 20%, and investments have stopped. Companies can neither buy new trucks nor repair broken ones. What they call the war economy has actually turned into a monster eating away at the country's future. Russia's oil sector, long used as the state's financial engine, is no longer printing money as it used to. Redirecting exports, maintaining the shadow fleet, and offering discounts to willing buyers kept the oil flowing, but at much higher costs and lower margins. At the same time, the government began doing something unthinkable before the war, directly subsidizing parts of the oil industry from the budget. This is a warning sign. Other sectors are also showing signs of stress. Coal, metallurgy, automotive production, forestry, and housing are all struggling. Subsidized mortgages have been reduced. Consumer loans are still expensive. Inflationary pressure has not yet subsided. Russia is not about to collapse. Large economies do not crumble overnight. But cracks are forming, and each new year of war makes it harder to ignore them. So, will Vladimir Putin simply watch the biggest logistical and economic crisis of his 25-year rule unfold? Of course not. Putin is an intelligence officer and one of the leaders with the highest survival instinct. But he no longer has a good option on the table. He can only choose between bad and catastrophic. When the money runs out, Putin won't print more because that would mean hyperinflation. Instead, he will dip into the pockets of the oligarchs and private sector he created. In a silent wave of nationalization, corporate assets will be transferred to the army and the budget under the guise of patriotism. Putin has already transferred 4 trillion rubles to the state coffers using this method. The western gates are locked, logistics have collapsed. Putin's only oxygen tank is China. In order to preserve his power, he may be willing to turn Russia into a giant gas station for Beijing. Transferring Siberia's resources and infrastructure projects to Chinese companies is a nightmare for Russian nationalists, but for Putin, it is a survival ticket. If the people look at their empty refrigerators and reach the point of revolt, Putin could divert attention by asymmetrically spreading the conflict to Europe or establishing a North Korea-style completely closed repressive regime internally. It seems that Putin is not trying to save the ship. He is burning the ship's planks to stay in the captain's cabin until the very last moment as the ship sinks. What do you think? Will this winter be the year the Russian economy freezes? Or can the system melt these icebergs? Let's meet in the comments. Stay tuned for the truth on MrWARLOG.